So for today's video, I'm going to give you 5 tips when it comes to using hang-on back filters for your aquariums. The reason why I wanted to cover this is because I recently added a hang-on back filter to my aquarium in the background. No, it's not in the aquarium itself, but it's attached to my sump. The reason why I decided to add a hang-on back filter to my sump is because, as you may or may not know, my sump is completely filled with K1 and there's no source of mechanical filtration. The only source of mechanical filtration I have on this aquarium is a sponge filter. But I kind of want to add a little bit more, especially with polyfill. I've made a handful of videos using polyfill and it's by far my favorite source of mechanical filtration. Enough of polyfill, let's go ahead and get this video started. So the first tip is pretty popular when it comes to hang-on backs, and this is adding a sponge to your intake. Adding a sponge to your intake is like having an extra line of defense. Actually, it's your first line of defense when it comes to maintenance, your fish's safety, your equipment safety, and so forth. When I mention fish's safety, I'm talking about if you have small fish or baby fish. This will prevent the fish from getting sucked up into your hang-on back and dying. And for your equipment safety, you're pretty much preventing things from getting in there that you don't want. For example, if your intake tube is too close to your substrate and your fish kicks up some sand, sand's gonna get up your intake, get in your propellers, and mess it up. Or if snails decide to climb up in your impellers, it could pretty much ruin it as well. Another pro that a sponge adds to your filter is it simplifies your maintenance process. If you have a sponge in your intake tube, it's pretty much your pre-filter, and all you gotta do is clean out that sponge and put it back in. Instead of taking apart the hang-on bag, putting things back together, if anything, it'll make your task a lot easier. Adding a sponge on the intake tube of your hang-on back filter will also increase your bio load. It's more surface area for bacteria to grow, which is good for you. So it protects your filter, it protects your fish, it makes maintenance way easier, and it increases the potential for more beneficial bacteria. This is the reason why this is one of my favorite tips, and also the reason why it's first. So, gotta start strong. You know what I'm saying? The second tip when it comes to hang-on back filters is change out that original media that comes in the box. I've only really purchased AC 110s, AC 70s, AC 40s, pretty much the Aqua Clears and the Fluvals. I think Aqua Clear and Fluval is the same brand. You can customize them the way you want and how you want it. They don't have pre-cut little cartridges that you have to buy. You can pretty much do whatever you want with it. So when you get your hang-on back filter, you're gonna have a whole bunch of stuff that comes with it. Most of the time it comes with foam, carbon, ceramic rings. If you buy Fluval, you'll most likely get Fluval ceramic media. So that's the brand I used to use. I actually have some right here. This is Fluval Biomax. It's one of my favorite ceramic medias just because it's so porous. I ended up buying a whole bunch because I ran canister filters for my old tanks in the garage, and I just have a whole bunch sitting around. And it's actually still wet because I took it out of my giant Brahmies tank. And this is my favorite type of ceramic media to use for hang-on backs. It might not be the best for you, but I do enjoy using these very much. Or if you get the hang-on backs that have cartridges that you can switch out, almost 100% of the time those cartridges is just filter floss media that has activated carbon within. It's fairly thin, it clogs really easily, and I think the reason behind that is they want you to buy more replacements for your fish tank. Carbon will be less effective over time, and filter floss does get clogged up fairly easily, so it's kind of give or take. If you like using it and you're continuously using it now and don't mind replacing it, go ahead. But for me, I would change that out for either ceramic media or a lot of sponges or foam pads that you can cut out. There's foam pads that you can buy on Amazon depending on how porous you want it. You can cut it to size and fit it into your hang-on back perfectly. Just remember to not stuff your hang-on back too much because you don't want this to clog and overflow and spill out and destroy all kinds of stuff. It's bad. Tip number 3 works well with some filters, but works best with hang-on backs, and that's adding plants to your filtration. When it comes to adding plants to your filtration, I've always used some sort of overhead sump or just straight up put it into my sump. But I found the best results when it came to using plants in my filtration system was in hang-on back filters, just because you can remove that lid and that filter will be running perfectly fine. When you have a canister filter, it's pretty much impossible. Your filter is sealed up, you can't add any plants into your filter, you have to add it in the tank. When it comes to your sump, depending on your setup, you might not be able to add it directly into your tank, but you might have some sort of a hang-on back system to add plants into it. Like for my K1 system, I can't really add plants into the sump because the roots will tangle up with the K1, causing all kinds of blockages, and it's not really too good. And if anything, it'll be counterproductive. But with a hang-on back, you have the ability to remove the lid, plant some plants in there like pothos or lucky bamboo, watch them grow, and your filter will run perfectly fine. There's a vast majority of terrestrial plants that do well with their roots submerged in water. The craziest plant I've ever seen someone put in a hang-on back was a whole sweet potato. It grew super big, the roots were insane, it grew really tall, and it was doing pretty good. Just do some research, find out which plants work best for this application, and get to planting or filtering, whatever you want to call it. My fourth tip is make sure you have no electrical components underneath your hang-on back. A couple years ago, before I had this bigger tank, I had a whole lineup of small tanks and a 55 gallon that was right here. And the reason why I'm talking about safety is because I actually had a big power strip that was underneath the hang-on back. It got clogged up and it was slowly dripping water that was overflowing out of the hang-on back on my power strip, causing my breaker to trip out. That simple mistake caused all of my fish tanks that were here to be powerless for about 8 or 9 hours or so. This happened at night, and I woke up in the morning, came out, and found out that all my aquariums had no power, all the tanks were super cold, and my 55 was only about 70% full. On the topic of overflowing, make sure that your hang-on back is properly leveled. On the bottom of your hang-on back, there might be a little knob, or your hang-on back kit might come with a little spacer. Make sure you use this to keep your hang-on back level. For the most part, all hang-on backs have an emergency overflow type of design when it comes to the shell of the filter, meaning the front part of the filter that flows back into the aquarium, the rim is usually lower than the back. So, in the example of this Marina breeder box, this front portion is actually lower than the back portion. See, there's a little cutout, right? This is to prevent overflowing from happening. If this filter is too far leaned back, then this emergency overflow is not going to work, because this is going to be your lowest point and water is just going to flow out like this instead of flowing back into the aquarium like that. So keep that in mind. For my hang-on back, since it's made for a 70 gallon and I have it on a 20 gallon, the glass might be a little thinner, so it's not as level as I want it to be. So what I did was I made some DIY spacers out of soft cardboard. You never really want to use super hard materials because you don't want to be jamming material between your glass and your filter. For me, I just use soft materials like cardboard, stack them up and stuff them in between the filter and the glass to make sure the box is leveled and you're pretty much good to go. So my last tip when it comes to hang-on backs is if you're using or if you're planning on using filter floss like the polyester filling, make sure it is secure. Because if a little fragment of that comes out, your fish might try to eat it, it might mess them up, or even worse, if your filter sucks in that little piece of filter floss and it gets caught up in your impellers, that's a bad sign. But at the same time, it's problematic because you don't want to stuff too much polyfill or filter floss into your hang-on back. That will cause an issue with clogging and overflowing. So you can either do a DIY cage with a light diffuser, which is the same materials that I use for my lids, or you can use barbecue skewers and zip ties to keep your filter floss in place. Let me go ahead and show you what I've done with mine. What I've done was I got the zip tie, tied it to the barbecue skewer, and cut it to size. This works a lot easier if you either use the original foam or an aftermarket foam for your first layer of filtration. What you do is you get the pointy side of the barbecue skewer and you stick it into your hang-on back, and then the zip ties that you have on the barbecue skewer will pretty much hold down the filter floss in place. That way you can run a thin layer of filter floss. You don't have to worry about your filter floss coming into your aquarium, and you don't have to stuff too much filter floss to the point where you're in risk of an overflowing filter, which is super bad. And like I've said before, the DIY polyfill that you get from Walmart, aka the DIY filter floss, is my favorite source of mechanical filtration just because it keeps my water clean and clear. So that's the 5 tips that I have for you when it comes to using a hang-on back filter for your aquarium. My fish are getting kind of hungry now, so it's about time to feed them. So I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for the next one, and peace, guys.